listening to pause. We pause for a second or two. This is episode 187, Horizontal Elevators. Imagine in the 1950s. Let's go back to the 1950s and imagine how it felt when cars started becoming something many people could afford. When we think about getting into our car, we feel that as we place ourselves behind the wheel, we feel that we can go anywhere. We can just start the engine and go wherever and in any manner we like. There is this sense of holding our autonomy in our hands. Holding that steering wheel is like holding our spatial freedom. And it's not philosophical. It is factual. It is like it is. If we sit in a car and drive somewhere, we can just go anywhere. It is factual spatial freedom. And imagine then how it must have felt like for society as a whole, for that generation, when you and your friends could have one car each, and you could go places, and you could meet up, and you could make plans in a whole new way. And if we look at culture, at music and literature and the like from that time, from the 50s, it's very optimistic, it's very colorful, it's very sexual. It's very much the feeling that there's so much nice things ahead. And much of it is centered around the feeling of getting in your car and going wherever you want. Now we will make a drastic change of imagination. So we will leave this emotional landscape, how it feels to have our own car and go wherever we like. And we will go somewhere else. We will instead move to our own time. And we will think about if we enter a tall building and we want to go up to the top of the building. And there are so many stairs that it is most practical to use the elevator. So we step inside the elevator, a vertical elevator. We get inside, the doors close, and we push a button. And then, while inside that tiny space, that tiny room, if you will, we wait. And we all know that feeling of standing there in the elevator, 50-50, hoping for the best and dreading the kind of situation we are in, that we have sort of given up our control and just we have no hands on the steering wheel there. We have just pushed a button and the elevator will hopefully take us where we are going. And we wait, and then we get there. And as we sort of step out of the elevator, we feel that our nerves are more tense as we have left the elevator than they were before we entered it. We are more on edge as we are leaving the elevator. Today's episode is called horizontal elevators. And what are we referring to when we're saying horizontal elevators? We are referring to what we get when we combine cars with elevators, namely what is being called self-driving cars. The concept of a self-driving car is that we get inside the car, we close the door or the doors close for us, and we push a button. Or maybe we don't even push a button, it just takes us where we are supposed to go without us doing anything at all. It's completely automatic. What is being called a self-driving car is not a car. It is a horizontal elevator. This is a very important distinction to make. A car is not what looks like a car. A car is the function of the car. A car is a small space which we get into and from which we have autonomy and control over where we are going in real time. That is a car. And no one can mid-drive, no one can change that. As we are holding on to that steering wheel, we are in charge of where we're going and how we're doing it. We are in charge of our own spatial freedom. And that is a car. That sort of factual function of being in control of our spatial freedom in real time. That is a car. What is being called self-driving cars is not really cars. It is elevators. They are horizontal elevators. taking us from point A to point B in an automatic way, exactly like a vertical elevator. In today's episode, we are talking about what this new invention or technology, or what we would like to call it. Today we talk about how this new technology makes us feel and what it does to our life. The Polaroid of today's episode, the emotional skill of today's episode, is universal skill creativity. Universal skill creativity is about that at any given moment, if we want to feel like that we are living our own lives, that we are sort of in charge of our lives, we need to feel that we have sort of influence over what is creatively happening. Like the car, for example. When we are driving a car, we feel creatively that we are in charge of where we are going and how we are doing it. It's not only getting from point A to point B, it's so much more. It's living our lives. To get a sort of intuitive sense of what universal skill creativity is about, we can just think of sort of the feeling to the 50s, how so much felt possible, creatively possible, when people could get those cars for themselves. Universal skill creativity is about what we choose to do with what we have, and to do it in an interesting way. That's what it's about. If we would sit down in a horizontal elevator, what is being called a self-driving car, but in reality is a horizontal elevator, we would not feel that much creatively engaged at all. We would be completely passivized. Completely passivated, maybe it's called. When I think about getting into one of these horizontal elevators called a self-driving car, the thought of it is really scary. I even get, like you just noticed, I get sort of unsure about if it's called passivized or passivated. The thought of stepping inside of an elevator on wheels and sitting in that enclosed space for more than a regular elevator visit. Let's say that a regular elevator visit is around 10 seconds to a couple of minutes at most, if it's a really tall building. Imagine how that sort of neural tension in our nerves. Imagine how that tension would feel like if we are in that space, in that closed space, for many hours. Imagine going across the country in a horizontal elevator and you're sitting there for 2, 3, 4 hours. Imagine how your body would feel after such a ride, or what we're gonna call it, such a transportation is better, maybe. These horizontal elevators, called self-driving cars, they have not yet been released in any great numbers. They are still being developed, but they are being very heavily promoted by many powerful actors right now. And wow, it's kind of dizzying, mind-boggling to think about how much people dread regular elevators and how many people fear elevators. How many people that sort of don't want to step into them for even once. How the same sort of tension, how we sort of tense up as we get inside an elevator, how that would feel like if we are in a horizontal elevator for many hours. How that would feel in our bodies, how that would make us think about ourselves and our creativity, universal skill creativity, as we're being made passive for many hours, sitting inside an elevator for many hours. And as we're making this episode, it can feel like we are sort of dwelling on this kind of fear of giving up control, fear of getting inside an elevator. But who in their right mind would step inside a vertical elevator for 2 hours? It's so strange. And it's very strange to have our natural sort of apprehension towards vertical elevators, and that we reluctantly use them if we feel that we must or we need them. And how that sort of reluctance stands in stark contrast to how heavily these horizontal elevators, so-called self-driving cars, how heavily they are being promoted. It's a very stark contrast. We feel reluctant to stepping inside an elevator for 10 seconds, but stepping inside an horizontal elevator for 2 hours or more is being presented as good or desirable. And it turns quite absurd when we put these two emotional facts together. It becomes absurd. And it makes us think about if there are other instances throughout history of inventions that have been heavily promoted but been rejected by the people. That is interesting to see. Is there other similar examples of something being sort of promoted very heavily, like these so-called self-driving cars, these horizontal elevators, and the people just saying, no, I'm not doing it, we're not doing it. I'm not getting inside that thing. I'm not giving up my spatial freedom, my spatial autonomy to something I have no idea how it works. I have no idea how it works. It's completely what you could call black boxed. You know nothing about it. It's completely just giving up all sense of control, all sense of self-respect, to just place ourselves inside something traveling at high speeds, and we have no control over how it is being done. It is absurd. So unfortunately, today's episode has this sort of absurd feeling to it. It feels strange even talking about it. That if so many people, perhaps a majority of people, are apprehensive about stepping inside a regular elevator, or maybe they do it, but it's not very comfortable, it's very tense and quite frightening at times, to think that we would do the same but for hours. It almost gets stranger and stranger the more we say it or think about it. And it's difficult to imagine any other outcome from, let's say, that these horizontal elevators are being sort of widespread, that everyone are supposed to use them. It is difficult to imagine any other outcome than that people would become extremely tense in their bodies. Extremely tense. Sitting hour upon hour in this horizontal elevator. Just giving up all sense of control of spatial freedom. So, if this would become reality, that horizontal elevators, so-called self-driving cars, are being sort of used widespread, people would become so tense that much of it would be about sort of finding other ways to release that tension once we get outside of the horizontal elevator. To sort of, wow, I made it out of the so-called car. Now what am I supposed to do? And how am I supposed to sort of calm myself down again? That would be a major implication, a major sort of consequence of putting ourselves in such a position. We would be so tense. Not very nice. And we will see how widespread these horizontal elevators will become. We will see how commercially successful it will be. Perhaps it will be used for some narrow uses, but not for everyone. But we will see. It is both an absurd subject and a frightening subject. It feels like the optimism of the 50s, but in reverse, it's opposite. It feels very bleak to think about it in detail. So unfortunately today's episode was kind of unsettling, but perhaps that was how it's supposed to be right now. That's it for today. Thank you.